Well, let's talk more now a little bit about the legacy of WikiLeaks, and in particular, the case surrounding its founder, Julian Assange. We are nearing 6 months that Assange has been holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. If he sets foot outside, he will be arrested and sent to Sweden for questioning related to sexual assault allegations. Assange and his supporters fear he would then be extradited to the United States and charged with espionage. And for this reason, Ecuador has granted him political asylum, though still, as of now, he has no way to safely get there. To talk more about some of the most far-reaching consequences of Cablegate, RT correspondent Laura Smith joined me earlier today from London.
So 2 years ago, on the 28th of November 2010, Cablegate really got into the swing of things. The first 220 cables were published by media partners of WikiLeaks in Spain, in Germany, in France, the UK, and of course the US. And what we've seen since then are huge consequences, both internationally and for WikiLeaks as a corporation and for people within that corporation. So we're going to talk about this in a little bit in more detail, I know, but there have been huge consequences in terms of the Arab Spring. Cablegate is really credited with being a catalyst for the Arab Spring. It's also, since Cablegate, WikiLeaks as a corporation, and many people will say that this is not a coincidence, has come under increasing pressure. Quite shortly following Cablegate, it experienced denial of service attacks on its servers. It was also blockaded by a lot of payment methods. So PayPal, credit card companies denied WikiLeaks their services, and so it couldn't therefore receive any donations. And that's a legal battle that's still going on. Of course, there have been consequences for Bradley Manning, who may or may not be the original source of the documents. He's in pre-trial detention in the United States as we speak. And of course, Julian Assange himself, the head of WikiLeaks, has been designated officially by the US as an enemy of the United States, along with WikiLeaks. So really huge consequences all round.
Yeah, and one of those that you mentioned, I think, is an important one, which is that in many ways this was a catalyst to the Arab Spring. Give some specific examples, things that came out of WikiLeaks that really played a role in these protests that have really reshaped the politics of the Middle East and North Africa.
That's right. It's important to note that Julian Assange always says that it wasn't WikiLeaks that provided the catalyst for the Arab Spring. It was the people in the Arab world. And in fact, during a speech to the UN that he gave recently, he was very critical of President Obama, who he says takes credit for the Arab Spring himself. But I suppose the most key example really is Tunisia, where, of course, the uprisings began with the self-immolation of a man who was protesting against the fact that he literally couldn't afford to live. 10 days before that event, WikiLeaks released a cable that showed that the president's daughter and her husband ordered ice cream to be delivered to them from Saint-Tropez. So while that was going on, the ordinary people in Tunisia couldn't afford to live. And there were many examples of that all over the Arab world, which really led to people thinking, we're not going to put up with this anymore, we have to get rid of these people.
You mentioned this speech that Julian Assange gave to the United Nations. I'm pretty sure that was the last time, really, that we have heard from him. I want to play a quick part of that speech, and then we'll talk about it.
The US administration is in trying to erect a national regime of secrecy, a national regime of obfuscation, a regime where any government employee revealing sensitive information to a media organization can be sentenced to death, life imprisonment, or espionage, and journalists from the media organization with them.
So Assange really pointing out once again some of the flaws, the differences between the U.S.'s policies and their actions. Laura, you have personally interviewed Julian Assange. What are your thoughts on his state of mind, his well-being, after being stuck in this embassy for more than 5 months now?
Well, first, I'd just like to tell you that I was there in the Ecuadorian embassy the night that Julian Assange gave his speech to the UN, and I can tell you that he made that speech in his socks. He's probably the only man who's ever given a speech to the UN in just his stockinged feet. But I guess, as you say, you know, there's no real reason for him to put his shoes on because he's not going anywhere. He has been holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy for almost 6 months now. And additionally, it's almost 2 years since the European arrest warrant was first issued for him, and since he's been holed up up in various locations. Whenever I ask him or a member of his team what he's doing while he's been in there, they always say, well, he's working. He works all the time. And it's true that information has kept on coming out issued by WikiLeaks, and he is very proud of that. But having said that, you know, his health is failing, as any of ours would if we were inside for that length of time. Just a lack of vitamin D, I think, and particularly now that the winter's come on here in the UK. People are saying that his vision is suffering slightly, that his state of mind has become much more pessimistic, if you like. And I think that I've seen that over the course of the 2 years that we've been following this story. But still, he keeps on working, and still, you know, he keeps up the pressure on the government, and the Ecuadorian embassy has been very instrumental in doing that too. While he's been in there, he's completed a number of projects. He has made a program for RT, notably, where he's interviewed a huge range of people, ex-Guantanamo prisoners, the first president of the new Tunisia that we just talked about. He also interviewed, before he went into the Ecuadorian embassy, the Ecuadorian president, which is believed to have been the first contact that he made with him. And he's also written a book which is being released this week, a book called Cypherpunks, which is based on one of the interviews that he did for that show. So although, you know, his health might not be all that one would hope, he is still keeping the pressure on and keeping on doing his work.
Laura, just one more question for you, and it's an overall sort of broad question about the evolution of WikiLeaks as an organization. I know it was, for a while, a widely used source, but now we rarely hear much about it. What's your take here on the timeline of how everything's happened?
Well, I think since Cablegate, it has been very hard for WikiLeaks as an organisation. As I say, Assange is still working, and just last month, WikiLeaks started releasing 100 classified and secret documents about the treatment of prisoners in US detention facilities, so Guantanamo, Bagram, places like that, and those are very important documents. But they have had a lot of problems. Julian Assange has had his personal problems that we've already talked about. There's been this blockade of funding by PayPal and MasterCard still going on through the courts. In fact, one day outside the High Court here in London, I saw a supporter hand Julian Assange a wad of cash for WikiLeaks funding, and him tucking it into his breast pocket. And really, for a while there was absolutely no other way that WikiLeaks could receive funding. So that's been incredibly difficult for them. And also, in the wake of Cablegate, the organisation fell out with a lot of its media partners, most notably The Guardian and the New York Times. So that's also made publication of anything in the wider sort of mainstream media very difficult for the organisation. But they are still carrying on, albeit beleaguered.
I think a lot of people forget, too, how much information that we do know now from the last decade or so actually did come from WikiLeaks itself. Joining us in our London bureau, thanks as always, RT correspondent Laura Smith.